Yeah, thank you so much, Ole. Hey, Anita, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here today. Thanks to the whole Fashion Tech and Premium team. How many of you live in Berlin? Okay, perfect. Who has ever Googled his or her name? Okay, that last question was completely random, just want to know. Yeah, today I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Berlin startup ecosystem, and I'd like to tell you my perspective through telling you a little bit about my entrepreneurial journey and about our journey at Factory. And later on in the presentation, I would like to talk a little bit about important ecosystem ingredients. Let's start really, really quick on a very personal note so that you see where I come from. I come originally from Leipzig. I moved to Houston with the age of 18, and then I decided to move to Berlin. And what did I do there? I joined the world of acting. I actually applied at the University of Dramatic Arts Ernst Busch. I worked at different theaters, and I really enjoyed being in the arty world of Berlin. There are like 20,000 artists. It's a huge magnet for international also startups, the big art and cultural scene. And I did that, and 8 years ago I decided to join the entrepreneurial world with my friends Jeremias, Philipp and Lukas, and we started to found our first startup. And like you probably know best, founding a company is basically about doing every day something completely new. You never know what to do next. So we did the first office move. We hired for the first time a team. We had no network, no investors, no clue actually, to be super honest. And we had our first launch. And that's not a picture of our launch. That's actually a picture of Per Steinbrück visiting us, but we always framed it as our launch picture. It was good for the media and the PR. And we did that, and we basically went through the whole roller coaster in Berlin, and we also saw the scene basically completely growing. And it was really impressive because 10 years or 12 years ago, there were a company like StudiVZ in Berlin. Some of you maybe remember the German Facebook. And then we got to know the idea of Factory because we met our partner and first investor, Udo, who bought this old brewery building in the middle of the city. And he had the big vision then later together with us to build a hub in the middle of Berlin. And SoundCloud joined and Twitter joined, and we did that. And we also saw that Berlin became more and more an important ecosystem because international politicians came to Berlin to get access to the startup world. International corporates joined. What happened now? The presentation is not...
They all joined and the presentation left.
Yeah. Now it's back. Perfect. Thank you. And we realized that Berlin gets on the map of international investors and startups more and more and more, which was really exciting to be in the middle of that. And also the international press wrote the Silicon Valley of Europe. And 2 years ago, we asked ourselves, so what is actually the Berlin ecosystem? What ingredients are important to build a startup ecosystem? And what is actually our mission within the ecosystem? And to understand our role and also the Berlin role in the world, we thought it's the best to do a little journey to other ecosystems in the world. So we went to Tel Aviv, to London, to New York, to Silicon Valley, to get a better understanding of the important ingredients. And what we learned is basically an important startup ecosystem needs density. It's all about density. It's about having great universities. It's about affordability of apartments and office buildings. It's about our investors, and it's about that kind of special, innovative, entrepreneurial DNA that Berlin, for some reason, totally has. I will tell a little bit more about that later. So we visited all different kinds of ingredients, so to speak, incubators, accelerators, new types, new hotel concepts like the Ace, the Hoxton in London. We visited lifestyle clubs like Soho, like Neue Haus, and we got more and more a better understanding what an ecosystem needs. We learned two things. First of all, we learned actually there is a lot of cool stuff happening out there, and Berlin has Berghain, and Berlin has the Beta House, and Berlin has great conferences, differences, but in the digital age, you compete with the world. And Berlin really has to step up the plate to mark a great ecosystem here. And secondly, what we learned for our business model was that desk is just a commodity because everyone has a desk. So WeWork has a desk, Starbucks has a desk, you probably at home have a desk, and that doesn't mean that you are innovative if you just put 30 people in one room. And then we got back and we talked to also many innovation agencies that screened and did a lot of research here in Berlin, and like you all know best, there's like this massive wave of technological innovation happening at the moment, and the world, how we live and how we work will change completely within the next 10 to 15 years. And then we had to look at some numbers. And we, of course, realized really quick that Germany is lagging behind. And what they built in the United States within the last 15 to 20 years is purely impressive. But what we also do have in Germany is we have 1,500 hidden champions, hit market leaders in all types of different industries, and that there's actually a huge potential. And so we came back and we thought about Berlin and the ecosystem, and we asked, how can we help build a European Silicon Valley? And really quickly we realized, wait, that's actually a wrong question, because Berlin, Germany has a complete different culture, a complete different history. The DNA of the companies is completely different, so we shouldn't always compare with Silicon Valley. We should understand more and more the entrepreneurial spirit here in the city and what we could change here potentially on the ground day by day. And we ask ourselves, how can we build a vibrant, thoughtful, diverse, innovative ecosystem? Of course, not alone, together with conferences, with incubators, with accelerators, with the WeWorks of our world, and we started doing that. Let's have a quick look at the numbers. At the moment, we have in Berlin 2,400 startups. And geographically, from a startup perspective, it's quite well located because amazing tech talents from Eastern Europe come to Berlin and join the startup world. And by next year, that's an interesting fact, the Berlin startup scene will be the largest employer of the city. And so you really see it's growing. There's still, I would say, a lack of international VC money. Actually, 2 years ago, Berlin was ahead of London, but now we are like rank 4. So we really need more international investors here in the city. But the cost of living is 40% cheaper than in London. And of course, it's a techno city. And the Berlin DNA, we talked to an investor from New York, and he said, I don't get Berlin. Because he said, I don't get it. Sometimes I walk through the city and I don't understand, is it art, is it history? But there's like, the city breeds somehow innovation, and it all comes together. And he said, Berlin feels a little bit like New York 25 years ago at the moment. So it's super exciting to be here, and he actually decided to move to Berlin. And what we learned out of talking to many ecosystem drivers in the world is it's all about the people. Let me give you 3 examples. In 1971, there was a guy, his name was Bill Fernandez. And Bill Fernandez, he had a good friend, and his friend name was Steve Wozniak. And they had a little walk in the summertime. They went through a park, and he said, hey, Steve, I need to introduce you to someone. And he introduced him to Steve Jobs by that day, who was actually washing his car. And he said, hey, you should meet. And a couple years later, they founded a company, and today it's called Apple. In 1995, there was a guy, his name was Sergey Brin, Larry Page, and he did a tour at Stanford, and his tour guide was Sergey Brin. And they did not like each other at first place, but later on they had another talk, and they found a company, and today the company is called Google. The last example I would like to share is out of the year 2007. There was a Christmas party at Dan Rosenzweig's house. He's a high-level tech executive from the Silicon Valley, and he invited all types of very interesting people, and his friend Mark Zuckerberg as well. He came to the party and he said, hey, you should meet actually my friend Sheryl. And they met for the very first time. They talked for 1 hour, and the other day they had another phone call. Sheryl became the COO of Facebook, and the rest is history. So why do I tell you that? Because the biggest tech companies in the world and the most successful tech companies, they were built out of complete coincidence because people had to walk, people met at a Christmas party. And what we should do here in Berlin, and that's also our mission, and that's also why fashion tech events like that and conference formats like that are super important, to make that coincidence, that you meet the right founder, that you meet the right investor, that you meet the right corporate partner a little more likely, because it's all about the density, and that's also what we learned. And what we also learned is that it's super important for an ecosystem to step up the plate and to tell the people out there what are your problems. It's happening at the moment here in Berlin with fintech, with IoT. Companies come to Berlin and they tell about their problems, and they ask the people, hey, we have a problem here, can you help us? So they're willing to share their knowledge and also to give more and more money to the startup scene, which is tremendously important here in Berlin. And the second important thing, I think, is to keep the stream of innovators flowing. So through conference formats like that one, but also through community builders like Techstars, Y Combinator, who are coming more and more to the city. And the third point is really important too, to reach out and to learn from other ecosystems and to ask, what did you learn? And to also get more exposure. And the last two things where I believe it's really important to engage with established companies, to learn from the big in order to get the potential to scale your product at some point. And the last, and I would say most important point, is actually to encourage the ecosystem to work together, to bake a bigger cake together and to not try to get a bigger piece of a smaller cake. And that's, I would say, a very American approach, more a platform approach. And I think we really believe we really need that mindset, that entrepreneurial spirit, more and more and more here in Germany. So generally, to sum it up, I'm very happy to have the chance to live and work here in Berlin at the moment and to build a community with all different ecosystem drivers. And I think we are at a really interesting point at the moment, because Berlin has this special entrepreneurial DNA. It's a weird city, but it's also a very fun city. More and more international tech companies join the city. Tomorrow is, by the way, the 10th anniversary of SoundCloud. And all those companies were super, super important. What Berlin needs more and more, I would say, is money. That also German corporates and family offices come to Berlin and generally to the startup scene in Germany and invest more and more money. That's really, that's a point where we are lagging behind. And thank you so much for your attention. And if there are any questions, you can also write me an email. And I'm generally very positive, and I think it's a great time to live in Berlin here. Thank you.